Thank you for tuning in to No Sudden Moves Radio. And remember, stay on the proven path so you don't risk falling behind. Here at Business Legends, we don't overthink it. Look around and see what everyone else is doing. If it's working for them, it will work for you.
Welcome to Wait It Out, where we believe there's no reason to act now. The opportunity will still be there when the timing is better.
The age of disruption isn't coming, it's here. And the boldest move isn't following the crowd, it's following your why. I'm Patrick Ledden, and you're listening to Disruption Lab. Welcome to the Disruption Lab podcast. My name is Patrick Ledden, and each week I have the opportunity to sit down and talk to people about their life, their work, their career, what they've learned along the way, all with one thought in mind, to help you, our listener. I mean, let's face it, life is full of disruptions, from the small daily curveballs to the big life-changing moments and everything in between. We all face challenges that shake us up. The question is, how do we respond? Today's guest is someone who knows leadership in the toughest conditions imaginable. Matt Eversmann is a retired Army Ranger, best known for his role in the 1993 mission to Mogadishu, Somalia, the real-life event that inspired Black Hawk Down. Since leaving the military, Matt's become an Emmy-winning documentarian and co-author of several New York Times bestsellers with none other than James Patterson. Their latest book, Walk the Blue Line, hit shelves last year, and they're already working on their next. I'm honored to have Matt with us to talk about service, leadership, and how we rise through disruption. Matt, welcome to the show.
Patrick, thank you. You're a kind man. I appreciate it. And congrats on your great success.
Well, let's talk about something we have in common. You've written a couple of books with James Patterson, as people know or are watching right now behind me. I have a book coming out a little bit later on with James Patterson this year. How did you and Patterson get together?
Yeah, so truly, Jim has said this a million times. It all starts at a bar, like every good story. But in this case, it really was true. We had a mutual friend down here in South Florida who connected us literally before I went on this boondoggle to Afghanistan to do this documentary, of which our mutual friend Tim was the producer. Anyway, of note to it all, Patrick, was that my friend Tim, who had worked with Jim over the years, said, Matt, before we go to Afghanistan to do this documentary, we should meet with Jim. You should meet with Jim and just talk to him a little bit about storytelling and what he thinks, we probably ought to be gunning for, so to speak. And, what do you say when best-selling author in the world, you had an opportunity to meet with him. So anyway, we met at a bar for, a burger at lunch, and couldn't have been more pleasant. And the punchline of it all, Patrick, is, what I learned from Jim Patterson, and I hate when people say this, but I'm like, I would think you would too, is you say, everybody's got a story to tell. Every single person you'll ever meet, everyone who's listening, who's watching, everybody's got at least one story that'll make everybody else say, wow, I had no idea. And so the trick is, can you find that person with that story or get that person to tell that story? And that was how it started with Jim. And boy, it's just been a lot of fun, to be quite candid, ever since.
Yeah, I know, working with him myself, it has been quite a ride so far. And I know there's a lot more to come that I just don't even know about. And you could probably speak to a lot of that from your success. But you mentioned that everybody has a story to tell. One thing that Jim's told me about you, Matt, is you're one of the best he's ever seen at getting people to share their story. And the way you responded right there suggests you probably have heard him say that as well. What is it that you're able to do to get people to share their story so well?
Well, again, that's really flattering, and thank you for saying that and sharing that from Jim. I think there's a couple of things, and I honestly, Patrick, I think a lot of it comes back from our time in the military, and we could quote doctrine and the leadership stuff, but this idea about taking care of your soldiers, taking care of your people, knowing your people, Army principles of leadership, know yourself, and see all that kind of stuff. And in mass funneled down into my little knucklehead. I think it's more than just being a listener. It's like truly being interested. And I can honestly say, and I don't mean to pat myself on the back, um, I find myself really interested in what people have to say. And in this case, think of the mission. Jim's like, hey, I want you to go talk to these people. So, part of my side is like, man, I want to do a really good job for the boss. But then the other side is, man, I really want to find that story, whatever it might be. And, it could be a banker talking about a fishing trip. It doesn't even matter. It's just getting people to do it. And that's the best I can tell you without being sort of cheesy. But I think that it's just, commit to being interested. My mom used to always say this, and you probably heard it a million times. They say interesting people are interested, and I think that there's a lot to it. Don't be distracted; just focus on the people.
As you were saying that, Matt, I was thinking about a conversation that we had. So I met Jim Patterson because he spoke at one of my classes at Vanderbilt, a class called Leading Business Through Times of Crisis, is where I first met him 3-4 years ago now. And one of the guest speakers in that class that came in and talked with us is a guy named Doug Parker, who was the former CEO of American Airlines. And it was kind of interesting. Doug Parker and Sarah Nelson, who was the president of Flight Attendants Association, which by nature, they would have a degree of adversarial relationship, right? The executive running the airline and the person who represents the flight attendants. But they would talk about how they got through COVID, et cetera, et cetera. But one thing that Doug talked about that really stuck with me, he said this little line, and I'm going to tie it back to what you were just saying. He said, a crisis is never the time to start making introductions. And I always thought that was a great point because the idea here is, you're going to lean into the relationships that you probably have already forged. So here's how I want to circle this back around. So you talked about like being curious and asking questions, getting to know people's story, and how that's it's something that Jim said you do really well, and I know you do exceptionally well because I've read a couple of your books, and the stories are just so compelling, and they didn't come out naturally necessarily without somebody engaging in the conversation. So I'm just thinking about some people right now who might be kind of in the lull between disruptions, if you will, or they're thinking about that comment that Doug says, like, hey, don't be making introductions, like get to know people now. There might be some things that you have done in your career that has helped you for the times you jump into the foxhole with somebody or the times you're kind of on the edge of stuff. What have you learned about like building those relationships well before they're necessarily needed in those trying moments?
Yeah, well, that's a great. That's one of those. I wish I were smart enough that I could have written that definition, that theory that you just described down, because it's really so true. And I can only bounce it back. I think you go through so many trials and tribulations and failures, which I'd like to come back and talk about in a minute, disruptions, that you get to the point you're like, listen, man, I don't have time to be modest. I don't have time, or immodest. I don't have time to be worried about other people's opinions. I don't have time for, all that stuff those inhibitors, and I'm just using me as the example, all those, I don't have time for it anymore. So I got to lead with my chin. I might have to ask an embarrassing question, embarrassing to myself, like, what's it like to get a doctorate degree? Because I don't know. And that gets us started, so those things, I think a lot of times, you clear that nonsense off the plate, you can have really meaningful conversations right off the bat. And, you start building those relationships. I always think too, I think it should be natural for people. Like there's so many things in life, I think it should be natural, and yet for whatever reason, it's not, and it becomes difficult. Again, this idea of building relationships is, no one told me, like nobody told me to get out of the army. Like you really work hard at building relationships for all the reasons you just said. You just assume that, hey, you're a nice guy, I'm a nice guy, nice girl, nice guy, that it all works, and it doesn't. So you gotta jump at it. But I don't mean, I'm wandering a little bit, and I apologize for that. But I think that, you just get to this. I just got to a point after, hitting some stone walls, hitting some rough patches where, chaos isn't going to knock first. You just got to be ready. And that means you got to prepare yourself to get into that fight.
There's when you said like there's two things I jotted down as you were talking about. One is leading with your chin, and the other one was, you didn't say it quite this way, but I just jotted it down, like get out of your own way. And I think those are both, those would seem like they're opposed, but they're not, right? So getting out of your own way is like sometimes just thinking in your own head about
Absolutely.
I don't know if I can, do I need to impress this person? Do I need to do whatever it might be? And then the other one is kind of, and then be willing to just jump in and take a shot at something.
Yeah. Well, listen, in the spirit of our conversation today, I think back, from so many things in my life, including my time in the military, all up to the point where, I get a phone call one day and the guy says, "Hey, Matt, it's James Patterson. I just wanted to talk to you about a book idea I had. What would you think about blah, blah, blah?" And I'm sitting on the other end of the phone, Patrick, thinking like, wait, Jim, did you hit your head? What are you doing calling me? Like, and immediately thinking, and my wife will tell you this absolutely true story, immediately thinking, no, I couldn't do that. I'm not qualified for that. I don't know how to do that. All these things I start talking myself, out of. And I remember then sort of thankfully just having this, moment where like this is the best-selling author in the world. I mean, the data supports it. Like this isn't, and even if it wasn't number one, it could top 10, it doesn't matter. But this guy's the best in his field, and he's asking me to help him. Why would I say no?
Mm-hmm.
Despite my whatever I might, not feel confident about, he sees it and he's the expert. And so say yes. You know what? Say yes. Don't be afraid to say yes. And I think that might have been, not that we're talking about the life lessons from James Patterson, but I tell you, that was one of the things I learned and I always give Jim the credit for. And because I could have very easily said no and just like, oh, wasn't that cool that Jim talked to me? And I said no, of course, and went on like, no,
Yeah.
just do it. Don't be afraid. Do not. And the worst thing that happens is that it doesn't work out. Like that's the absolute, and you and I know this, and I hate usually when people say this, like, nobody's dying today, nobody's getting shot at. But in a sense, that really is the marker. Like, you know what, your ego might take a little bruising. You might feel a little embarrassed. You might feel all this stuff. But at the end of the day, you know what, your life goes on.
Yeah. There's gonna be some times where you don't, the fact that this, I'm speaking for myself, like the fact that I don't know how to do something is going to show up, and your ego is going to take a little bruise in the process of doing that. I mean, yeah, right, because he's a partner, he's candid in his feedback, so you kind of have to work your way through that sometimes as well. But how did that conversation? Speaking of disruption, like how did that conversation where he reaches out to you and you could have walked, but you decide, no, I'm going to give this a shot. I mean, how did that disrupt your life?
Oh man, well, it turned it on a dime. I mean, it turned it on a dime, and you always we live in a world of hyperbole, and it's easy to, oh my gosh, he changed my life and all this stuff. And in a sense, he really did, truly. I mean, there's no doubt about it. Things that have happened since then wouldn't have happened had we not, gotten in cahoots. But you know what? I think the gut answer to that question is, man, it really gave me something to get excited about. And quick time out. I wasn't, on the edge. I wasn't, in distress or despair or anything, but I was kind of wandering professionally, after a series of jobs and never quite hit the bell of, excitement. It's like, oh man, I've got to go get another job. I got to start this other company. I got to do something sort of to keep the lights on, to pay to keep the family going and all these things. And anyway, to have this opportunity literally get presented, it just changed, because all of a sudden I'm like, man, this is, now I can get into that position of that group of people that really like what they do, that really enjoy it. Like genuinely get up every day and say, man, this is really cool. I'm going to go find somebody to talk to. I'm going to find somebody to share a story and, put a couple of dollars in my pocket doing it. Like that, what an amazing recipe for success and excitement, success in the emotional,
Yeah.
success. So that would definitely be, there's no doubt about that. It definitely changed me in that perspective, that disruption, my life changed it. And I think also, it also gave me this kind of growing confidence, and Patrick, you might have experienced this after your time in the service, this identity. I call it the identity crisis, or my wife would call it the identity crisis. You go from, hey, super duper, airborne ranger to, man, you got to pick up your own luggage and carry it into the airport kind of thing. And, you're kind of trying to figure out this new world and this new identity. And that's hard.
Yeah,
That
when you're used to a degree of, well, whether it's a rank related thing or a badge or patch that you're wearing or whatever it might be, it's a little bit of a, they're kind of like hard fought things that you earned, and then all of a sudden you go into an environment where those don't really matter. In fact, they could be a negative.
Yep.
And trying to find your way through that is really tough. It's funny when you mentioned how that happened with Jim as far as reaching out and it was a disruptive thing for you. What you talked about was exactly what the book we wrote was about, because it's all about like, hey, we have this fire inside of us and we have lots of disruptions that hit us in life. And sometimes some of those disruptions can throw fuel on that fire in a really positive way. So when you said, yeah, I decided to do it, and then boom, I'm like wanting to get up every day, wanting to do things like, not that you weren't wanting to get up before, right? But like fired up to get up. That's that disruptive moment throwing fuel on the fire. So take us into kind of that disruptive moment that happened back in '93, the disruptive moment that you wrote about in the first book you did with him. Would you mind, Matt, setting the table for the listeners who might not be that familiar with it?
Yeah, so the kind of the Reader's Digest version, um, we've got this huge mission going on in Africa, in the Horn of Africa, all United Nations peacekeeping, the thing that the global world wants to solve a problem in Africa. So all the UN countries are there, and the problem is with the antagonist in this story, a cat named Mohammed Adid, was a warlord in the area and the most powerful one. And the short story, folks, is that when the United States decided to change its policy towards this UN peacekeeping mission, withdraw its force, the bulk of the forces, come back to America, this guy Adid was pretty angry about it. I mean, think about the Godfather in the movies. That's what he is. He's a warlord. And anyway, he let us know. He starts doing very offensive operations. Kills a bunch of journalists, kills a bunch of Pakistani peacekeepers, and really just terrorizes this country to the point where the United States decides we're going to send back. Now we're going to send a fighting force. We're going to send Task Force Ranger, this special operation task force created with one mission, that's to go to Mogadishu and kill or capture Mohammed Adid, of which I get to be a part of this operation. So to land the whole plane, as you might imagine, unlike in the movies, capturing one guy in a city of 2 million people is challenging, especially in sub-Saharan Africa. But we're on the move, we're on the hunt, whatever cliche we use to chase down this guy. And coming up to October 3rd, 1993, we get the alert that two of Adid's top guys, and maybe even Adid himself, are going to have a meeting in this really bad part of town. And so we launch on this mission, thinking it was going to generally take about a half hour to swoop in and capture or kill these cats, and wind up getting into an unbelievably hellacious firefight in which 18 soldiers are killed, a couple of helicopters are shot down, scores of enemy are killed, and at the end of the day, it's like a 18-hour gunfight that resulted at the end, when all was said and done. Certainly the mission was accomplished, but two of the American Delta Force snipers, Gary Gordon and Randy Shugart, both were posthumously both posthumously received the Congressional Medal of Honor for their heroic and gallant acts of sacrifice on October 3rd. So that's a really quick story, throwing it in, a mission that we'd done a bunch of times before. On this moment, on this day, went sideways right off the bat. And so a fight to try and recover, figuratively and literally, through the process of, oh, by the way, being in a fight was a bit of a challenge. And it was written about in this book, Black Hawk Down, turned into the movie.
So, so at risk of leading with my chin and asking a question, where you're like, dude, you should know the answer to that question. Or I'll say I'm asking on behalf of a friend.
Yeah.
How's that? Was there like a degree of like, what do you think, intel failure? I mean, did you just not know? Were we unable to be informed? I don't want to say intel failure necessarily, but what was the reason that it was like a little bit harder to pull off than you initially may have thought it was going to be?
Yeah, so I think honestly, and it's a great question. It's a thoughtful question. Why did things turn away, and what could we predict, what could we have done, and all these things. And probably the short answer is a little bit of all of the above went wrong. Intel failure, overconfident, underestimating the enemy, blah blah blah. Who knows? And then Murphy's Law riding along with you.
Yeah.
We've done these things before, and then on this day, everything goes out. So a little bit of a lot. But I don't know, as I've thought about it and wrestled with it from a preparation standpoint, I don't think we could have been any more prepared, as soldiers with our crafts, getting into the fight. I don't think we got caught on our feet like, oh man, they didn't know how to shoot the bazooka kind of thing. And we certainly had the most advanced technology at the time. So I don't think that was it. And, I counted up one time, the combined years of experience of the JSOC staff and the command staff. And, we were like, 110 years or something of combined, battle experience. So it wasn't that we had knuckleheads in charge.
Yeah.
So kind of reverse engineering this thing, Patrick, it came down to an awful lot of stuff. I think I would stand by it. I think, bad intel. But you're going, you got to do the best you can with what you have. And, on one hand, not to go down too far down this rabbit hole, task force ranger, you guys go do this mission. This comes from the White House. And then, but we're not going to give you all the supporting assets that you need. Like you're not going to help you build an intel network because we don't have time. You got to go and do this. So, there were a lot of conflicting constraints, I think, that were put upon us to get started. And again, I don't mean to turn the show into debate about Mogadishu, other than, I look back on the things that I did poorly as a leader that day and realize, there was no one to blame but me. Like, hey, whatever problem I had in Chalk 4, somebody over at Chalk 1 was having a much different problem, but still having an adverse effect on, their ability to do battle. And oh, by the way, this is all, under the umbrella of, there's 10,000 armed Somalis and there's only 150 Americans on the ground. I mean, what are the odds here that anything good's going to come of this? So I don't mean to waffle about the answer, other than if anything, I would paint the picture that it went from 0 to 90 in about a nanosecond, without even time to comprehend that it's disruption, as we're in the spirit of what we're talking today. I would only add on to say, kind of as a lead into other things to talk about in a minute, but this disruptive event, I learned you don't have time to sit here and contemplate the state you're in while it's happening. I don't think. I think, when this thing happens, whatever this thing is, your helicopter goes in the wrong spot, your comms are down, you got a casualty, you fill in the blank, you really don't have time to think about it because, somebody is going to die. And so you leader, teammate, follower, whatever, you've got to be at that, operating at that level where I'm just going to keep going. I have to, whatever I need to do, I got to keep doing it. And I got to keep going and keep going and keep going till somebody tells me to stop, because damn it, we're in a bad way. And I can't, what caused this disruption, can't worry about right now. We can worry about it later. Can't worry about it right now. I'm in the moment. I've got to be, focused on this fight. And again, I'm sorry, I'm wandering, but I get fired up talking about
No,
this.
keep
This
going, keep going. That's fine.
um, you just because we've been, a lot of times, and even in our army, I think a lot of times we're sort of been sold an industrial age thinking, mindset, like, you did this, you failed, you're wrong, you're going off the cliff. And it's like, well, no, you didn't even fail. It just didn't work. And not to be coy and, try to quibble here, but it's like that approach didn't work maybe right now, or maybe it wouldn't work in this environment, but it could work somewhere else later. But you don't worry about it. Like, try something else. Keep going. Because again, you got to get to that objective. You got to get to whatever. And I think that's where the special operations mindset comes in. David Grange was the RC regimental commander when I first got there, and I'll never forget. It's the first time I heard somebody say, we teach our Rangers how to think, not what to think.
Hmm.
And again, it sounds like something you'd write on a wall, like, of course, good, that's good rah rah stuff. But no, it was really true. We need young men that are going to be out, in the boondocks, on a critical mission without the ability to get any answers. We got to teach those men and women, how to think, not just think the Eversmann way. And that was a big deal to young Ranger Eversmann learning that lesson, which I think fast forward helped in dealing with disruption in October 3rd, 1993.
That's so true when it comes to organizations at any level, when the ability for people to think and act in the face of disruption. I mean, just think from a corporate perspective, right? Something major shifts in your marketplace and you're trying to pivot your company and you've got thousands of employees. You got a heck of a lot better chance of pivoting your company with 1,000 employees if every team understands like what their contribution is, what the mission is, how they align to those things, et cetera, so they can make, and how much risk they're allowed to take, and what the impact is if they like you said, we call it failure, but yeah, that didn't work. All right, what are we going to do next? Type of thing, as opposed to that defines us. As you were talking about time in that, you said 18 hours, right, Matt?
Yeah.
Yeah. So there's that moment like where time is like moves really fast in some ways, especially in moments of crisis or disruption where you're like, and time is not usually your friend. But then the other hand, you had 18 hours, which is like an enormous amount of time to be in. I can't even imagine being in that type of situation. So I'm kind of thinking like, when you look back on the 18 hours, was it a flash? Did it go quickly? Was it, you can remember like certain moment? I mean, what did that time feel like?
Yeah, so two things. So I got out that evening, which you can read the book and the movie and get more of the nuance of the story. So back at the airfield, trying to take care of the wounded and prepare for more rescue operations as well as the defense of the airfield. Um, but to answer your question in the bigger sense,
Yeah.
it's so weird how your mind works and the things I remember, and I've talked to buddies that were, on that mission, with me, literally with my chalk that day. And it's fascinating the things that we remember, that we don't remember, what we disagree with on what we remember or what we saw. And, the two truths kind of thing. But there's also this bit that it's like such a blur, like it just, blink of an eye, like, wow, all of a sudden, like that really had all these things happen in such a short amount of time, basically in a day, like in a day, this all happened. And I think that the psychologist amongst us could have a better explanation of why that happens. But some of the things, and I know I'm sort of playing the Heckle and Jekyll here, some of the things I remember so vividly, the smells, the sounds, the like just dreaming in color. And then other things, it's like, man, I had no idea. Like, I had no idea that what somebody told me they witnessed with me happened. I'm like, I had no recollection
Yeah.
of it whatsoever.
Wow.
It's wild.
It is totally wild. And I could imagine that, where it's like things like even things you did and somebody mentions you did it, you're like, I don't remember doing that, whatever it might be, right? And to them, that's true, not just in those intense moments like you dealt with there, but that's true just in leadership in general. There's a lot of things that you do as a leader that you pay no mind to, but it might make a huge outsized impact on somebody.
Yeah. Yeah, no, I do. And it's funny, I've said this to, I was talking to a young high school uh, student the other day who was scrambling to do his end of the year paper. He was doing it on Black Hawk Down. And so the teacher said, "Hey, would you mind talking to this guy?" And I did. And anyway, this young boy had some really good questions. And he said something along the lines of, what do you hope your, um, maybe he said, what do you hope your legacy, is or was, and something along that lines about, with respect to the Rangers. And I said to him, I said, um, and again, Patrick, this sounds sort of weaselly to say it, but I just pertinent to this conversation. I said, I hope that I did everybody right. Like I hope that I was a good, fair leader, just and everything. But like I was single, for instance, like when I was most of my career, I was single. I didn't get married till later in my career. And, when I was about to retire, our daughter was 2. But, as a father and a grandfather, your children, one, being married changes your life. Having children changes your life and everything. And with that, I'm like, man, I know you're not supposed to play favorites, but I hope that I was good to the married kids.
Mm.
Because they are kids. They're, a lot of times they are 15-year-olds with babies. But I hope I was good to those wives. Like I hope that I was. I just hope I was. Fill in the blank what that might have meant, but I do, and I don't know. I never asked, and I didn't know to ask, and certainly would never ask now. But you're right. The decisions leaders make, and we do it without even thinking. Almost probably to the failure point, this point of, where we're so mission focused. And that deal. Like so many people we're so mission focused, we forget that fifth principle of patrolling of common sense, and we won't be swayed. Like we're gonna go do this mission on Christmas Day because like these people don't even know how to tell time. Another day's not gonna, Iraq is not gonna heal itself overnight. I mean, but we do. We got to do it on Christmas Day so that we can make that horrible phone call, which is a whole debate for later about, what mission dictates stuff. But anyway, we do. I think sometimes we get tunnel vision.
Yeah, in all sorts of big and small ways too. I mean, just so I remember my time in the military, there was even like coming back from airborne operations. It was like, oh, if we're back in by 2 a.m., you're back in by midnight, you better be at PT at 6 a.m. And it's kind of like, really? In hindsight, it's like I'm telling a young soldier who might live off post with their family to clean their weapon and jump in their car and drive, 30 minutes, get 2 hours sleep and drive 30 minutes back. Is that the smartest move? But there's always that part of it. So I want to take this full circle. So in the beginning, we were talking a little bit about, the phone call from Jim, and you're kind of going, should I do this? This is the guy is like the best-selling author. And then you decided to do that. And the encouragement of people just to like, say yes to opportunities like that. I don't want to read into it, but I think that's what you're encouraging, right? Like say yes to those things. But there could be some people who say, yeah, Matt, but you had a career, you had successes, you had failures, you had struggles, you went to Mogadishu that we just talked about. So your bar was higher than mine would be. And the reason, my disruption might come with some great opportunity, but I might fear, and I could explain it away by saying, well, I'm not Matt Eversmann. I was not an Army Ranger. I was not this, I was that. The other day, Jim and I were on stage talking to a group of people, and a young lady asked a question about something like that, like where do I start, or how do you not get nervous in those moments? And I started launching into some conversation that was a little bit more in your head, and Jim just simply said, just put your toe in the water. Like what's gonna happen? So I guess I would just, and you know what, that answer's a better answer than what I was giving, so I'm gonna probably lean more into that one as opposed to all this other stuff. But I'm just curious from your perspective, if that young lady asked you the question, like, but what if I'm a little nervous, or that opportunity comes along? How do I get started on something, especially if I don't know how it's going to turn out? What would you tell her?
Yeah, no, well, it's hard now that you planted that seed, but that I would agree with you. That's probably as good and basic an answer. Put your toe in the water. is going to work. I generally do. I will say I do find myself often giving the what's the worst case scenario
Yeah.
kind of focus. Like, you should, you young lady, what is the worst that can happen? And
Yeah, and
no,
that's what I was kind of like when I started with her. I was like saying like, well, I said, what's the worst that could happen? I said, I used to think like in the army we jumped out of planes and we put people out of planes, and none of that's going to happen. And that's when he just said, put your toe in the water. And I was just
yeah,
like, that's a great answer.
yeah. Well, I think, but in fairness, I think, Patrick, we give it that our answers give a little context. A little, we do frame that frames some, I think, somebody up like, Mary Jane, what I want you to tell me what is the worst
Yeah.
that can happen if you don't do this. And I think that's kind of, I've always used the, sort of flippantly sometimes, like, hey, nobody's shooting at you. It's
Yeah,
not
yeah,
that.
yeah, yeah, yeah. But right,
But
when you say that you're framing the worst, right? What's the worst that could happen? Um,
and sort of same church, different pew, depending on the context. But I found myself when people say, like, "Oh man, I could never have done that. I could never have done what you do." And when you hear the story of Mogadishu or in Iraq or whatever, I could never do that. I'm like, well, listen, you could. I mean, with the right training, a monkey can do a lot of things and all that. I said, but listen, there's a lot of things I've never, like I've never dealt with. For instance, I've never dealt with divorce in my family. I've never dealt with cancer. I've never dealt with catastrophic illnesses. I've never had, there are things that people do routinely in our people in our lives, even.
yeah.
And I've never dealt with that. And I don't, I can honestly say, I don't know how I don't know how I would deal with that. I don't know how if I had to be the caregiver, like all these other things that maybe this young woman had or hadn't. But I guarantee you, there's something that she's faced also that I've never faced. That I'm like, wow, you've already done something that I couldn't do. If that helps you out in this idea, like you can do that. And I think the other thing, the last thing I would just say, sort of along this idea though, using this woman as as an example. Listen, we all have some ability to reason, but in general, like, listen, Matt, I want you to perform surgery, and take out the fourth floating rib. It's like, I don't even know what a fourth floating rib is. I don't know how to do that. Like, let's not be silly. But a lot of things, like, we probably have more talent than we're giving ourselves credit for, which really means just, digging in and mustering up some competence and, some chutzpah to go do it. And I would think sometimes, and we learn this in the military, we want young men and women to put their toe in the water routinely, like sua sponte, of your own accord. That's what we need you to do, man. We don't need you to wait to be told. We want you to be the person that we got to say, hey, stop, wait, hold on, come back here.
Yeah,
I need to
yeah.
tap the brakes a little bit, buddy. Slow down. But more often than not, it's like, man, we got to get them running out of the barn.
Yeah, you're
So
right.
this woman probably would, I suspect, be someone that just needs a little bit of she wants to do it. She just needs a little bit of a push to get that toe in the water. Anyway, I'm wandering.
No, you're right. No, so in not to keep pushing the book behind me, but like in Disrupt Everything, because it's how it is when you're working on something, it's so top of mind. We talk about these 4 facts in it, and the second fundamental fact of disruption is you're wired to disrupt. You are wired from your brain. You can actually create a different future and make things happen in that direction. No other animal on planet Earth can really do that. You're wired from your experiences. You've done these things before, what you were just talking about right now. And then you're wired for your resources. You have resources you could tap in to, even if you feel like you're really strapped, you still have things you could tap into, time and energy and things like that. But that experience is so true because, if we were able to take everybody who's listening to this podcast or listens to this podcast over the next, couple of months or whatever it might be, and assemble them all in one room. And then just one by one, people go through their experiences and talk about the curveballs life has thrown them and how they've overcome those things, whether it's the illness, like you said, or other health scares or education or taking care of whatever it might be. We would be blown away by what people are. I mean, the human capacity is huge, and people sometimes discount the things they've done. Well, what I did wasn't what that person did. It's like, no, but what you did was really freaking cool. Own it.
Yeah. Yep.
Yeah.
Well, and to that point too. Listen, I don't mean to sound like we're going down the conspiracy rabbit hole. Um,
Oh,
you know,
it is a podcast, Matt. It's okay.
so come on, man, we got Martians and stuff. No, but I find, and we chat a little bit, the 58 years old on this planet, um, in what logic I was given growing up, it's probably a little too strong, but there was a lot of information that was driven home beyond, just being a good moral and values-based young man and hopefully a good gentleman and all that kind of stuff. But there was a line of thinking that I certainly grew up with, that my parents, instilled in me, and a lot of it, as I've looked back, um, maybe could have been updated, refreshed, shined up, sanded, I don't know, the rough edge. But, there's some things that I'm like, man, I'm not sure that everything you told me growing up actually turned out to be true. I don't think that, not being able to figure out, my major and having a job 3 seconds after I graduate from college, if I don't do that, I've just gone into the abyss. It's like, I don't think that that's actually true. And I say this kind of thinking about when you invited me kindly to this interview, and thinking about disruption in my life, and kind of in all of our life, and certainly in mine. I'm like, man, I've told soldiers this all the time. Like, dude, the number of failures I've had is so many that I don't even look. I kind of strike failure from my vocabulary. Not that things don't work. Of course they don't work. Like, and by definition, failure. Got it. In Eversmann mind, I'm taking that off the plate because things haven't worked out far more, in aggregate, far more. They've been disrupted. But it's made the victories, that much sweeter. But it's always opened up the door for a next great adventure.
Yeah.
And, whether that was a short adventure or a long adventure, it doesn't matter. Again, James Patterson using this, that opened up the door, for a great adventure. And, so I look at people, I'm like, dude, if you're harping on, my failure, you're harping on the past, you're looking in the wrong direction. You just are. You're not looking around that corner for the next, whether it's a locker opportunity. Do you really care? I mean, whatever it is, this next adventure is sitting right there. And wouldn't you rather get excited about that instead of looking back that way?
Yeah, exactly.
Dr. Phil stuff, but it's like, geez, man, go forward.
No, you said, I'll end it with this. Patterson said to me one day, would you rather drink from a cup of grief or the cup of joy? And maybe he said that to you too. He's like, grab that cup, as he would say, grab that cup of joy, man, and just drink.
Yep.
Yeah,
Yep.
absolutely.
And keep chopping. That's another, Jim, from day one, I've always remembered, I say it to my daughter all the time, like, keep chopping, just keep chopping. That's all we can do.
Absolutely. Well, hey, man, thanks so much, Matt, for joining us today. I enjoyed the conversation. It went fast, and I hope this people take a lot from it, whether it's how to deal with failure sometimes, because it's a part of the equation, especially if you're going to try to do anything in this world, or recognizing that sometimes when you get thrown in the midst of stuff, you just got to make the next right decision. And you'll look back at it and just don't look back with regret. Own what you did and move forward from there. And ultimately, the idea of, regardless of how you go about doing it, you got to put your toe in the water, right? You got to give stuff a shot. Well, that's all we have for today at the Disruption Lab. Big thanks, Matt, for joining us and sharing not just your story, but your wisdom on how to lead through chaos and staying grounded and finding purpose after disruption. If you found this conversation valuable, share it with someone who might need it. And if you're navigating disruption in your own life or organization, remember, you don't have to go it alone. Until next time, I'm Dr. Patrick Ledden. Now go make it a great day.